Go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham. On August 3rd and 4th, Nissan workers in Canton, Mississippi will vote on whether or not to join the United Auto Workers. This NLRB vote has been years in the making, and the Nissan workers are being subjected to a very aggressive anti-union campaign from Nissan that includes anti-union videos playing in the plant and forced meetings, including one-on-one meetings with Nissan supervisors, where workers are subjected to fear and intimidation tactics by the employer. Nissan worker Christopher Milton.
Fear, intimidation, even racism is part of that plant every day. We go through a lot of that. Put fear on the workers, we can control them, but they don't never give us a fair chance to say, why we need a union. We need a voice at this plant, and the intimidation and the fear, it really needs to stop. They should have no part of telling anybody it's wrong to have a union. It's bad for you. You're going to lose your job. You're going to close the plant. All of that is just a big lie.
Dion Monroe says her boss has threatened that organizing a union will lead to pay cuts and worse.
He told me that if the unions come to Nissan, that y'all pay gonna be cut or the plant might close. All we want is a fair election without the intimidation and the threats.
Wade Cox echoes his co-worker on their desire for a free and fair union election at Nissan.
We just asking that we have this opportunity to have a fair and free election, free from intimidation, free from threats.
The UAW says it's filing another round of unfair labor practice complaints against Nissan with the National Labor Relations Board. An innovative community benefits agreement in Los Angeles is creating a robust program to create more job opportunities for people who need it the most. Jobs to Move America is partnering with BYD Company to build electric buses in the city of Lancaster in Los Angeles County. Jobs to Move America includes the AFL-CIO, SMART, the International Association of Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transportation Workers Union, IBEW, IAM, and the Blue-Green Alliance. Jobs to Move America's Erica T. Patterson says there will be hundreds of good union jobs building buses with zero emissions into the environment, a community benefits model that could be embraced by companies nationwide.
This is an example of what we would like to see from all companies in this industry, a real commitment to not only invest in cleaning up our environment, but creating opportunities and career pathways for people who need these jobs most. And we look forward to working with transit agencies that are interested in incorporating incentives to promote this kind of partnership between business, labor, and community.
WIN is brought to you in part by the Amalgamated Transit Union, the largest labor union representing transit and allied workers in the U.S. and Canada. Online at atu.org. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce its size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is The Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for tuning in today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about from the American Federation of Teachers. Teach 2017 conference here in Washington, D.C. You remember last year we were here, Randy Weingarten and AFT, the first union to come out and support Hillary Clinton. And you go back and you think about it, look where we are today, and you wonder why. This administration for education has been horrible. And we're only 6 months in. Ideologically, they're pushing their privatization, their vouchers, their attack on teachers in public education. And over the next couple of days, we're going to be talking about those attacks. We're going to be talking about what's coming and what we can do to stem some of it off, to fight back and to save education, not just for right now, but for the future of this country. Because look, as I've been saying for a long time, once they privatize it, once they hand it off to the privateers, it does not come back. And again, I throw the plea out there. If you've found something that we as a nation have privatized that you think has been cheaper, better, and, well, everything that was promised, I'd love to hear about it. But today we're going to be talking with teachers, educators, folks who are activists, and also the union's leader. And I'm sitting here with David Quolke. He is the president of the Cleveland Teachers Union, my hometown. David, thanks for sitting down with us and taking time for us.
Good morning, Rick. Thanks for having me.
So, I look at, the assaults on education, and I go back to my hometown. The whole, privatization, hand everything off to business. Cleveland's kind of like ground zero in the attack on education.
Yeah, when it comes to statewide, we've certainly been the experimental model for just about every piece of legislation.
Every bad piece of
Every bad piece, thank you. Vouchers started in Cleveland, and ever since then, we have no proof that they've been successful in helping educate kids or living up to that promise of what they were supposed to do. Cleveland is the only school district in Ohio that has mayor control, and that in and of itself has not improved, really, instructions. And now they have a Cleveland plan, which takes away a lot of collective bargaining rights. But at the end of the day, it really is what is occurring in the classroom and what those educators do each and every day that actually is moving education forward in Cleveland.
It just seems to me so short-sighted because we keep seeing we're going to have this new plan and this new silver bullet. Because, look, I grew up in the 70s in Cleveland where we took poor kids from – I grew up in a housing project on the west side. So they wanted to take poor kids from my neighborhood, put them on buses, ship them to the other side in another poor school, and we were just shuffling poor kids around. Bus companies made a lot of money, all that, but didn't really help education. And I look at these latest silver bullets. We know what works. Roll up the sleeves, build a community school, and, oh, by the way, fund it. Seems sane.
Yeah, and listen, in Ohio, we actually worked hard on legislation to support community schools 2 years ago. As that worked, and it was a bipartisan effort, when it went through the legislation at the last minute, the governor jumped in and took that language, completely wiped it out, and without any public discussion, targeted school districts in Youngstown and distress commissions throughout the state, really to impose privatization. So, I think to your point, what we see in Ohio is politicians who desperately want a silver bullet that's not out there, and they are willing to sell their souls on any type of legislation they think will enhance their ability to get reelected.
And that is not about education. It's about the ability to get reelected because, you don't want to upset the apple cart of the people who actually vote. And sadly, we see in poverty communities, they don't vote at the rates that higher incomes do. I keep going, if only we could get those people to vote, maybe they would vote themselves better schools.
Yeah, I actually think that is critical. And what you mentioned a little earlier, the notion of community schools, is absolutely critical. Because we know our families, nobody uses poverty as an excuse, but we know we need to get as much resources and supports for those families, whether it's after-school programs, whether it's nutrition programs, whether it's tutoring, for those families to make them re-engage. And what better place to do it than their neighborhood public school?
Now, I'm not going to agree with you on the nobody. Because I'm somebody who uses poverty as an excuse. Because, look, I grew up in a housing project there on the west side. Purtis Elementary School, they tore down after I was in kindergarten, so that was a whole other thing. But I remember that school. In the summertime, kids went there to get a lunch. And for many of those kids in that line, that was the only hot meal those kids got all day. There were programs for sports programs in the summer. There were academic programs in the summer. It didn't just shut down. There were programs after school. It didn't just shut down. It was a vital part of that community until they tore it down.
Yeah. Well, and I think what you're seeing in the Trump budget is you're actually seeing a budget which is aimed at gutting any of those programs we have. So after-school programs, nutrition, where sometimes that is the only healthy meal the kid gets a day. He is targeting to eliminate those programs in favor of expanding privatization and vouchers in charter schools.
Well, he's trying to do what Ronald Reagan did, because I remember, look, I was a child of the 70s. Reagan came in, all of those great society programs, all of that help for poor communities was just wiped out, and it looks to me Trump is trying to do the exact same thing.
Yeah.
You remember ketchup as a vegetable. Mr. President Reagan, what?
Yeah. Yeah, and we still deal with that kind of notion to do, whether it's education or nutrition, do it on the cheap, which is unfortunate because, so many of our kids, so many of our schools really need those supports and those resources. But, what I've seen in Cleveland, we've passed 2 levies in the last 4 years when we had only passed 3 in the previous 43.
Right.
We're seeing a renewed interest, at least in our schools. We're nowhere near where we want to be, but we got to be able to tap into that. And I think what we see coming out of the state in support of vouchers and what we're seeing coming out of Trump is really a community that wants to invest in schools and a state and a federal government that wants to disinvest in their public schools at a time when I believe parents and community members want that school to be really the centerpiece of their community.
And that's just not Cleveland. I mean, you can go, to cities and states all across this country. Where I live in Pennsylvania, it's the exact same thing. The state has walked away from funding education, and they go, no. Back in the 70s and 80s, the state was picking up about half of the cost of public education. It's down into the low 30s now, and the local tax base can't cover it. But I'm sure the state of Ohio is almost the same scenario.
Yeah, and when you see in Ohio, listen, their method of funding schools has been ruled unconstitutional 4 times, and they just pretty much wiped their hands. And they will tell you they're investing more money in education, but it's not public education. They've really slashed their support of public education as they expand their privatization models. One other thing I need to say is that many of our legislators are just infatuated with the need to test kids so they can rate our schools as failures to kind of support their privatization agenda.
I mean, we're data driven. We want to put a number to something so we can either say it's passing or failing. Mm-hmm. And if you look at, I go back to when I was in school. I got to think that the tests that they take today, we would have failed back then as well. Because we've opted our children out of the standardized tests in our school district. But in order to opt out in Pennsylvania, and I don't know if Ohio allows you, but in order to opt out, you have to go and examine the test. So as a parent, and I've got a master's degree, I sat down and I'm reading through these tests and I'm going, my child's in 3rd grade. There's no way that they're going to understand these questions. There's no wonder that they fail. And that's why I just, we're not doing it.
Yeah. And, many of our teachers, at the end of the day, they're really the professional advocate for kids. And many of our parents who don't understand the high stakes of these tests, and they understand the stress it puts on their kids when their kids are coming home.
Well, I'll tell you a story real quick. The reason we opt out, my oldest daughter was play teaching with the other 2. And, she was saying, you got to pass this test, you got to pay attention, because if you don't, they're going to take money from the school and the teacher's going to get laid off. And I'm going, you're in 5th grade. You shouldn't know this. And it's coming from somewhere. And that was just like this crystal moment where you go, I'm done.
Well, and I went to school in the 70s too. And you had the teachers you loved and everything.
That's everywhere.
But you loved going to school. That was really where you wanted to be. And the pressures that were out there, that are out there today, I don't remember a single one of them as I worked my way. I remember vocational classes. I remembered every kid had a pathway, whether that was going to be college, whether that was going to be career tech schools, vocational. And there seems to be such an emphasis on the testing, and pushing everybody down the college path. We really kind of fell away from really trying to find out what every student needs.
Yeah, last question I've got for you on the voucher front, because I know a lot of people seem to be in love with this idea of choice. I should have this golden ticket. And I know in our state, one of the state senators who is pushing this, I actually had on the program, and I said, if I get this golden ticket, if I get this wonderful piece of paper, can I go anywhere? He goes, yes, you can go anywhere. So if I want to take my kids down to Philly to the Abington Friends School, which is $40,000 a year, it's going to pay for that, right? Absolutely. It's not.
No.
But it's this illusion that I've got this golden ticket.
Yeah. And, we've seen, our experience in Ohio is that most of the families, it's not about choice. Because most of the families without a voucher, we're going to choose the parochial school in their neighborhood. What it is about is subsidizing, parochial schools.
Absolutely.
And choice is fine, but when you start attaching public dollars to it, you're going down a path that you really shouldn't. And in Ohio, we found, I want to say, the majority of the families, a high majority of the families, would have chosen private schools regardless of whether a voucher was there or not.
Well, what we're doing was subsidizing the people who are already sending their kids to no question in my mind. David, I appreciate the time. Good luck for you guys there in Cleveland and pushing back, because you were ground zero where it started. Hopefully it's ground zero where it started.
Well, and our members have been great around the pushback, and thank you for having me on this morning.
Great stuff. David Qualke, president of the Cleveland Teachers Union. Quick break here from Washington, D.C. at the AFT Teach 17 conference. This is the Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
All of my life I have searched for clarity. I have wrestled with two paths buried deep inside of me. I lost some rounds, been knocked around, felt my share of defeat. Yet somehow I've always managed to get back on my feet.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2.
On this day in labor history, the year was 1971. It was an historic day for the men and women who deliver the U.S. mail. It was the day that the American Postal Workers Union and the National Association of Letter Carriers signed their first ever union contract. Although there had been earlier postal unions, they did not have formal bargaining rights. Postal wages were set by Congress. This meant that the starting wage for postal workers was only $6,200 in 1970. Many of these workers actually qualified for food stamps. Frustrated at their low pay and working conditions, postal workers in New York City walked off the job. Soon, 200,000 of their fellow workers across 30 major cities joined them on the picket lines. A story in Time magazine described the impact of the work action, writing, quote, "The first national postal stoppage in U.S. history and the largest walkout ever against the federal government, the postal strike almost immediately began to strangle the operation of commerce, impair government functions, and vastly inconvenience the public. To end the strike, Congress awarded the workers a 6% raise. But even more importantly, Congress decided to reorganize the Postal Service. The Post Office Department changed its name to the United States Postal Service. With this reorganization, postal workers won for the first time the right to bargain for better wages, hours, and working conditions. Their first contract raised the starting wage to $8,488 a year, a more than 30% increase to the pay level before the strike.
Whoa, yeah.
For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Proud defender of the working class majority, Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com, as we are here in Washington, D.C. for the American Federation of Teachers Teach 2017 conference. I guess like 1,500 people from all across the country with stories to tell, ideas to push, and, well, a passion to save public education. And I'm sitting here with Mary Jordan, the president of the Norwalk Federation of Teachers. You may remember we talked a while ago about Connecticut and how the right-wing attacks with their, the founding of the state policy network institutes that are up there and all the right-wing money, pushing the poison in a state like Connecticut, a blue state that you could have never imagined. Mary, thanks for sitting down and taking time for us.
Hi.
So, I look at, like I said, Connecticut was one of those states that you go, really, I don't think all of this anti-worker, anti-education, anti-teacher stuff would have been there, but it is.
But it's here. We've had several legislative initiatives this year to limit collective bargaining of municipal workers, state workers, collective bargaining in general. And it has a pernicious effect because even people who would ordinarily be supporters, but maybe lukewarm supporters, they can point to their colleagues and say, well, that's never going to fly. Or they can start to make incremental change that is not beneficial to union activity in Connecticut. It really does. We want to stop that snowball before it forms.
Now, do you think the attack on, because I get this a lot, I get the public education is just infiltrated with the union people. We need to get rid of public education, and not so much public education, but you.
Union.
But
yeah,
you.
It's us. And it can be quite personalized. We had a very big battle in Norwalk. We had a Board of Education crisis. We came up $4 million short in the Board of Education budget that was supposed to have been settled July 1st, was in fact settled July 1st. Through the entire spring and late winter, there was an attack on the union, that the union leadership would not allow the city to raid our contract. We had a contract in full force and effect with certain health benefits associated with it, and because the city needed the money, they expected us to roll over, say, here you go, here's our health insurance, and trade it off. In the end, we worked it out, but we worked it out through, I think, the right means of collective bargaining.
Right.
We were able to represent the needs of the teachers, which ultimately serves the needs of the students.
And that's an important point to make because, look, if you've got poverty-ridden teachers, you've got teachers who got to work a second job or, they've got all kinds of outside concerns. Right. It's got to have an effect in the classroom.
Absolutely. We want teachers who are healthy. We want good teachers. Norwalk is a community in Fairfield County in southwestern Connecticut, an hour from New York City. We compete for our certified staff with New Canaan, Wilton, Westport, Greenwich, Fairfield, very wealthy towns who can afford to pay much better salaries than Norwalk does. We have to have salaries that are in competition with them. Yeah. So it is very easy for our community to have a grudge against those salaries. But ultimately, our community has stepped forward and said that they value education, that they value the teachers, and they know the cost is going to be much greater if we have impoverished teachers with poor health benefits.
Yeah, but isn't this where the state should come in and act as something of a leveler? Because, look, you're never going to compete with Greenwich or some of the really wealthy communities.
Well, the state has a program called the ECS grant funding system. So
grant funding.
They determine the dollars that are given in relief for educational services. They do distribute millions, billions of dollars. However, the formula of distribution depends on your grand list of taxation. So it's very heavily dependent on real estate. Because Norwalk is in the middle of the Gold Coast of Fairfield County, our real estate tends to be very expensive, although our income generally is not very high. So we don't compare well to other towns that are up the line, that are away from this incredible wealth. So we have a wonderful place in Fairfield County. We love our place in the world. However, it doesn't serve us well in some ways.
Yeah, and you're still better off than Bridgeport is.
Yes.
I mean, and
everybody knows who's in the ranking. Every municipality
Certainly
likes to think there's somebody worse off than them, and Bridgeport has a lot going for it, but they really do struggle a good deal.
The reason I bring that up is because Greenwich is one of the wealthiest areas in the entire country.
Yes.
And yet you have this wide gap of equality to where, again, I come back to the state saying, if every kid should have a thorough and efficient public education, and it should be funded, and it should have all of the same extracurriculars and all of the same books and computers and all this.
It's not a reality.
It's not a reality.
And it's a stark problem in the state of Connecticut. There's a very big lawsuit that has been going through the courts for years and years, the CJEF lawsuit, in which and Norwalk has signed on as a partner in that. It should be a fundamental right of students to have an education. There should be some basis, some baseline for that education, and it is not happening in Connecticut. And the state should be able to provide some minimal level of education, and even that that threshold is not being met, and that is the basis of an education. Lawsuit has gone pretty far. It's not been resolved. We're very interested to see how that will be resolved. It's in the judge's hands at this point.
Yeah, and there's something wrong with that as well.
No question.
Because look, as parents, I think we all want the best for our kids. And, and that's where I think the privatizers are playing on us, because we all want the best. So you go, well, now you have this choice.
Right. And it boils down to conversations with the budget crisis in our town, Norwalk. There was a conversation about whether music education is a luxury, whether arts education is a luxury. I would argue that it's not. We have board members who think, no, the basis of the job that they have to perform is literacy, numeracy, college and career-ready skills.
Writing, reading, arithmetic.
Right. We can argue that music and the arts do provide a career. However, that's not what they really did not feel. That was a complete luxury, and they're still working to dismantle that. They argue that there is just not enough dollars to support the luxuries. And,
I go back to, you internalize, you look at yourself. And, had there not been football or basketball or those extracurriculars,
That's right.
I may not have finished high school.
Yeah. We had wonderful testimony coming from current music professionals who had gone through the Norwalk Public Schools and had found their passion and had gotten through tough middle school years and had gotten through, they found the motivation to succeed in their math class where they may have given up, because they knew if they had failed that math class, if they hadn't gotten the minimal C to remain in the marching band or in their football program, they would not have been the successes they had. They really were wonderful testimonies.
So is it these school boards have forgotten that? Or is it really just about, because I know a lot of school board members, it's about the dollars and cents. In fact, they got into it just because, most of the school board people I know got into it because, look, it's about, we don't want to raise taxes.
I think school board members universally care about students. They care about education.
I hope so.
I think there are other motivations at play individually. However, in general, they care. Everybody's in it for, I like to believe, and I have not been disappointed, we are all in it for the same reason, whether we're board members, central office people, or teachers. However, I think there's a difference of opinion in how real that budget crisis is. I think we live in a very wealthy state in Connecticut, and there needs to be a willingness to share the burden. When we have state employees this week agreed to give back billions of dollars in concessions of salary and benefits with the CBAC agreement, we do not have the same willingness on the part of legislators to ask for those types of sacrifices from our corporate community and from, the financial industry is huge in Connecticut. We've got hedge funds and all kinds of things. There's a lot of money there. I think there's an ability to find funding for the state and for the state needs. But people believe in the budget crisis. People say hands off of those fat cats, and that's fine. We shouldn't be looking only to millionaires. But when we are asking for givebacks from municipal employees, state employees, teacher pensions are at risk now, it should be a fair share. There should be across-the-board sacrifice if sacrifice is required.
I'm not going to go that far with you because, look, I look at somebody who's a state worker who's worked their entire life to build this pension and going to retire with some dignity and respect. And now you're going to go, we're going to take portions of that.
Oh, I don't agree with the pension proposal at all. No, I totally agree. But the shared sacrifice, I think shared sacrifice is not a bad principle to go and try to harvest some more funds for the state of Connecticut that's really struggling. And that's not what's out there. It's really just these public employees. You go after them. I don't get that.
Yeah, see, my problem is we've had this tax cut fetish for so long.
Yes.
That we've created these crises.
Yes.
And,
that's right.
And now because they've created a great crisis, they're not hurting who are hurting are the teachers and the state workers and average everyday working people who have seen all of their fees go crazy.
That's right.
The cost of their kids going to education going up. All of this other stuff. The working class of this country is just being decimated.
Yes.
Because we've had this fetish that we need to give tax cuts to people who don't need it.
It's crazy.
It's
I
just
totally
nuts.
agree.
And Connecticut is really, to me, it was that state. You go, really? One of the richest states in the entire country?
With some of the most impoverished students.
Exactly. New Haven, Bridgeport. You go to some of these places and you go.
I think there's only one other place in the country outside of, I think it's in Wyoming, where you have the millionaires in Jackson Hole surrounded by the ranch hands families out in the, but there are very few places in the country with the range of wealth from the very lowest of the impoverished to the very highest. That range is very widespread in Fairfield County, and it shouldn't be. There should be some leveling effect. That's what community is. That's what government is for. That's why we have banded together as a country. We are all in this together. At some level, we can dispute the edges, but I think we should not be able to tolerate students in schools that are crumbling, unhealthy, and poorly managed.
I'm right there with you. Last question I've got for you. You look at this mass inequality. Is there an answer, do you think, to this? I mean, is there an answer for parents, students, for teachers to be pursuing? I mean, out of this conference, you're going to come with some ideas, maybe?
One idea that I have is I don't believe in the financial crisis that we're in. I think it's manufactured. And the more you have these crises, the more, whatever it is, state, municipal, federal, people start to say, well, there is no money. What are we going to do? And they make the compromises.
That's compromise.
They make the compromises. I think the people out there in their communities need to know there is money. It needs to be, we need to demand the services. We have the ability. How to get there is different, but the complacency and the acceptance that there is no money shouldn't be tolerated.
Yeah, I love their compromise, and I talk about this all the time. Compromise in their world is, Mary, we'd like to chop off both your legs.
Yeah, we want your health insurance. That was their compromise.
We want to chop off both your legs, and you go, no, I need at least one. Just take one leg. And then the next time they go, well, we want the other leg. No, take half. And eventually you end up with no legs anyway. But you thought you had some choice. You're absolutely right. Yeah. Mary Jordan, I appreciate you taking time. Great talking with you. Enjoy the conference, and please, back with a fight.
Thanks very much.
Great talking with you. Let's take a quick break here from the AFT conference in Washington, D.C. This is The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
There's a flaw in the system, and the fly in the ointment is going to bring the whole thing down. Floodgates are open, we've let the demons loose. The big guns have spoken, and we've fallen for the ruse.
Betsy DeVos and her hubby Dick are lucky enough to have inherited a big chunk of the multi-billion-dollar fortune that Daddy DeVos amassed through his shady Amway Corporation. But what they've done with their Amway money is certainly not the American way. The DeVos couple are part of the Koch brothers coterie, pushing plutocratic policies that reject our country's one-for-all, all-for-one egalitarianism. In particular, Ms. DeVos has spent years and millions of dollars spreading the right wing's ideological nonsense that our tax dollars should even be given to private schools that exclude people of color and the poor, as well as to profiteering schools known to cheat students and taxpayers. Bizarrely, Donald Trump chose this vehement opponent of public education to head up the agency in charge of, guess what, public education. Rather than working to help improve our public schools, the Trump-DeVos duo wants to take $20 billion from their federal funding and give it to corporate chains. To see the efficiency of this scheme, look to Arizona, where State Senate President Steve Yarborough pushed privatization into law. One of Arizona's corporatized schools, called Axto, pays its executive director $125,000 a year. His name is Steve Yarborough. Axto also pays millions of dollars to another for-profit corporation named HY Processing to handle administrative chores. The Y in HY stands for Yarborough. And Axto also pays $52,000 a year in rent to its landlord. Yes, Steve Yarborough. This is Jim Hightower saying, as Wall Street banksters, drug company gougers, airline fee fixers, and so many others have taught us over and over, Most corporate executives are paid big bucks to take every shortcut, cheat, and do whatever to squeeze out another dime in profits. Why would we entrust our school children to them?
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com, here at the AFT 2017 Teach Conference. You know, one of the things I love about coming to these things, and we do, we do several conferences and conventions each year, is that you get to grab people who, are doing really great, interesting things, changing the world, organizing the future, really good stuff. That's what I love about this. The future of this country depends on, what opportunities do our kids have? And what future do they have? Education being front and foremost into that. Anyway, I've grabbed Jessica Tang. She is the newly elected president of the Boston Teachers Union. Jessica, thanks for sitting down with us.
Glad to be here.
So what do you think of this event?
I think it's a great opportunity for teachers really to, it's about professional learning, of course, and learning about different, new pedagogy, etc., and it's really about practice.
Pedagogy.
Yes.
What is that?
That is how we teach. Really, thinking about what are the best practices in instruction and teaching and learning, and our members come here and just learn about lots of different ways to challenge their own teaching and find out what are the best kind of methodologies is another way I guess you could put it, that work. But in addition to that, we get to meet educators from all across the country and, share best practices, get inspired, and re-energize. And I think that's, a really important piece of summer in general is professional learning and growth and kind of refueling so that when you hit the ground running when you start school in the fall again.
So if I'm getting this right, because, I have friends who say, you guys only work 9 months a year, you're on the beach 3 months, having a good time. This seems like work.
Yeah, but that is, I think, one of those common misconceptions. We are constantly in professional development over the summer. You have to keep up with your licensure. You actually have to take courses constantly, and you can't get your license renewed unless you have that additional learning and growth. So this is a great opportunity, and it's a really great opportunity for our members to just, again, share, learn, and continue to grow their practice.
And, as you have a really interesting story behind you, the founding director of organizing at the Boston Teachers Union. Yeah. Explain to me how it is that you're a young woman being the founding director of organizing. I'm struggling with that because shouldn't there have been organizing going on all along?
Well, it is a new position, and we definitely had organizing already through our our internal membership structures.
Oh, good.
So that that part wasn't new, but what I think the position was really founded to do, and what I was able to bring to our union was not just a focus on internal organizing, but really thinking about how do we engage parents and students and community allies to fight with us for public education.
Right.
Because when we fight together, we're stronger, and when we were fighting alone, it's so easy, the teacher bashing out there, and we realize, our natural allies are our parents and students and community members, and we've got to be working together because we've shared values.
You bring up the teacher bashing. I mean, that's really got to weigh on teachers. I mean, at the end of the day, like I said earlier, I mean, my daughter came to me, one time and said, "Dad, I want to be a teacher." And I go, "No." It was kind of this cringe moment where you go, "No, something else, garbage man." There's more respect there.
Oh, that's so sad. I mean
but I mean, honestly, I mean, you see or at least from where I sit, you see all these arrows being bad teachers, failures.
Right.
Everything's your fault.
Right, and that is hard, and I think it does take a toll on us. I remember my first few years of teaching. I started teaching in 2005, and we're working our butts off. Staying till the the night custodial staff kicked us out. We're working so hard, and then to read the newspaper and say, like, everything that's wrong is our fault, it does take a toll. And that's kind of actually part of the reason why I got involved in my union in the first place, is because we needed a voice. We are the experts. We have knowledge. We know what the solutions are. And then we'd get all these other policies that were kind of getting piled on us that didn't always help our students. And so getting involved in my union was a way that I could have voice.
Yeah, I always find it interesting that politicians make rules on education without actually consulting teachers.
Incredible, isn't
It seems weird to me.
Yeah.
But then again, we live in a country where, we were talking about contraception for women with all white old men. So, I mean, nothing should really surprise us at any point.
Right.
Given that.
Right. And, I mean, I think that's why so many people are upset about Betsy DeVos, is that here's someone who has never taught
She's a billionaire.
in a school, right?
She's a billionaire, so she must know something.
Oh, right. I forgot.
Oh, that's right. She won the birth lottery. Never mind.
Right.
But at the end of it, no, that took some skill too, right?
I'm trying to find the right words here, but I think
there are no right words for that. But here's the thing, and you're right. I mean, you look at Boston being a big city. I'm sure you have all of the same problems that that Cleveland and Milwaukee and Chicago and a lot of the big cities have, and that they're really trying to cut up education in your area with charters and vouchers and all of the same horrible policies that are going across the country.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, again, that's, I think, a great thing about being here at the Teach Conference is that we are able to talk about, well, what's happening in your city? What are your best strategies to fight back? And, let's share how we've been fighting back, too. For us, we're really proud of our win in Massachusetts on Question 2. Again, we weren't supposed to win. We were being outspent.
What was Question 2?
Question 2 was the state ballot question to expand the Commonwealth charter schools in the state. And it would have siphoned off millions of dollars from the traditional public school system because of the way the funding structure works.
Right.
And so it's already been hurting our schools. The state is not actually fully financing the reimbursements that are supposed to go back to the districts. And so we have all these cuts to our schools and every expansion of the Commonwealth charter. It wasn't even about being anti-charter even. It was just that every time there was more charter schools, then the public schools would lose funding.
Right.
And so there was tons of money being poured into our state to win this ballot question, and the parents, students, teachers, community, school committees, mass school associations, the mass parent, it's probably the first time the school committee, superintendents, teachers, parents, community, we're all elected leaders, we're all on the same side of the issue, and we were able to defeat it. But that's the power of collective organizing.
So did you use Pennsylvania as the example of why you wouldn't want to do what Ballot 2 wanted? Because Pennsylvania does all of those horrible things. Mm-hmm. In fact, in Pennsylvania, they got this neat little rule that the charter schools get paid before the public schools.
That's how it is in Massachusetts.
So you go,
too.
Wait a second, where's the priority?
That's exactly how it works in Massachusetts, too. And so they get the money follows the students to the charter schools, and then the district doesn't get reimbursed, and so then the cuts come from the traditional public schools.
And then we've got these great great failures called cyber charters. Maybe you've heard of them.
I have.
Where we give money for the exact amount that you would put in a brick and mortar school to these cyber charter schools, and the cyber charter stuff only costs about half. Huge win.
Yeah, well, actually, last night there was a screening of Backpack Full of Cash, and in that movie they discussed the cyber charter schools, and it's really disturbing to me that they're for-profit companies that are making money off of taxpayer dollars, and then the students aren't even getting a quality education. I mean, the achievement rates of students who attend those cyber not for-profit schools is horrible, and yet it keeps expanding. And so that's, I think, a classic example of the privatization of public education that we're fighting.
Well, they do trot out a couple that do well, and those were the kids who were homeschooled anyway, and they were going to do well anyhow.
Right.
But you got to have that example. My favorite it was Charter School Day, and I know this is kind of off topic. It was Charter School Day, and the kid took a picture of himself saying why he loved charter schools. He was sitting in front of two screens. One had his homework assignment, and the other had Google up there as he was looking for the answers.
Mm-hmm. Yep. There was similar.
Cheating.
Yeah.
Cheating, my favorite reason for cyber charter school. So in looking at this, I mean, you look at this conference, and what are you hoping to take back to Boston from this? What are you hoping to accomplish?
Well, again, whatever new opportunities we can learn about to engage our members, engage our parents and students in the fight for public education, that's definitely something, we are open to. In fact, that's happened. One of our members came a couple years ago and learned about the Teacher Leader Fellows program, where AFT has piloted this, program where once a month on Saturdays for a whole day, our teachers come and do a research action project. So they identify an issue they want to learn more about, they research it, and then they come up with solutions, and then are able to advocate for policy solutions.
Nice.
And so we brought this back to Boston and became one of the 12 districts to pilot it, I think, in its second year. And so that's a very concrete example of something, that one of our members came here, learned about it, said, hey, can we do this in Boston? And we said, yes, we'd love to. And now we've had 3 or 4 cohorts of 15 teachers who go through this program. And they've presented now at the State House at hearings. They've talked to legislators, and they're really advocating and using what they've learned to advocate for solutions to problems. And, that's something we do all the time, and again, flies in the face of those teacher stereotypes, because it's, not us saying no, it's saying, hey, we are researching, we're learning, and we're providing solutions that are grounded in actual practice in the classroom every day. And I think that's very much what this conference is about.
No, I think that, and it is. And I think more importantly, it's about getting teachers who are going to be advocates. And I've been saying for a long time, we need a more militant education class. Because the people who want to destroy public education, they're quite militant and well-funded.
Right.
Don't forget the money.
Right.
Lots of money.
That's
and
right.
as my grandfather always said, if a rich guy's going to tell you, take a buck out of his pocket to tell you don't need something, you better spend 2 to get it, because they understand return on investment. Just is that what it is. Jessica, I appreciate you taking some time for us. Best of luck. Enjoy the conference, and best of luck back in Boston.
Thanks so much.
Great talking with you. Quick break, right back here from the AFT Teach Conference. You got questions, comments? We'd love to hear it. Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Back in the studio on Monday here in Washington, D.C. until the weekend. Quick break, right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1934. That was the day that came to be known as Bloody Friday. Minneapolis Teamsters had been on strike for 3 days in their 3rd strike of the year. Trucking bosses had reneged on their May settlement. They refused to recognize union organization of inside workers. In the period between strikes, the union had documented hundreds of cases of discrimination. Now, 7,000 Teamsters effectively shut down trucking throughout the city. Local 574 leaders established a daily strike bulletin. The organizer, as it was called, would serve to guide strikers to victory. In his book, Revolutionary Teamsters, historian Brian Palmer notes that the first few days of the strike had been quiet. Then, on this day, police attempted to break the picket lines by running what seemed to be a lone scab truck through the lines. It was later discovered the truck was moving no merchandise, but was used to draw strikers into a confrontation. When flying pickets moved to stop the truck, they were ambushed. Police opened fire on unarmed picketers and then sprayed those who attempted to escape with buckshot. At least 48 were wounded. Striker Harry Ness and unemployed council supporter John Beller were killed. Palmer notes that Ness had been shot point blank in the chest. Doctors pulled 38 slugs from his body. His deathbed injunction repeated word of mouth among the strikers, "Tell the boys not to fail me now." More than 40,000 turned out to pay their respects to the World War I veteran and father of 4. Palmer adds that Bloody Friday had lasted a matter of minutes, but its meaning would leave a mark on the very fabric of Minneapolis's socio-economic relations. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. Iran continues to be the world's top state sponsor of terrorism, according to a new State Department report released on Wednesday. The report comes just days after the Trump administration certified that Iran is acting in accordance with the 2015 nuclear deal, But Iran's good behavior appears to end there. According to the report, Iranian-backed terror groups like the Lebanon-based Hezbollah directly threaten U.S. allies. The State Department accused Iran of supplying Hezbollah with thousands of rockets, missiles, and small arms in violation of UN Security Council resolutions. The report went on to fault Iran for supporting Hamas, as well as Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, and for not doing enough to bring al-Qaeda to justice. And us journalists love hot mics, those times when politicians forget there's a microphone listening in on them. Remember this candid conversation between President Obama and Russia's Dmitry Medvedev?
This is my last election, basically. Yeah. After my election, I have more flexibility.
Well, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is the latest victim of the hot mic, as reporters got a chance to hear his conversation Wednesday with Eastern European officials. Netanyahu was heard confirming that Israel had conducted airstrikes within Syria dozens of times to interrupt arms shipments to Hezbollah, the very weapons sales detailed by the State Department report we just mentioned. Israeli officials had never officially claimed responsibility for those attacks. Netanyahu also had a candid assessment of what it's like to do business with the Chinese.
We have a special relationship with China, and they don't care. They don't care about the political issue.
But at the end of the day, none of what Bibi had to say was all that surprising. Hence the saying that hot mics are when politicians tell the truth by accident. For more global news headlines, visit talkmedianews.com.
So we won the evangelicals. We won with young. We won with old. We won with highly educated. We won with poorly educated. I love the poorly educated. We're the smartest people. We're the most loyal people.
Yes, we love the stupid people. Bring them on. Wow. I mean, I got to be honest, every time I hear that, it just makes me cringe that someone actually voted for that. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com, here at the AFT Teach 2017 conference in Washington, D.C. And, one of the questions that keeps popping up, especially in my world, is we spend all of this money on military, we spend all this stuff on war, we spend all this money on tax breaks for the very wealthy. In fact, we're going to kick, 32 million people off so we can give off of insurance, so we can give another tax break to people who don't need it. Yet we're not funding education at anywhere near an adequate level. That's why I've asked Jeff Duncan Andre to come talk with us. He's an associate professor there at San Francisco State University. Jeff, thanks for sitting down with us.
Sure, it's my pleasure.
So you look at this, and the reality is we spend an awful lot of money on stuff, blowing stuff up, making big rocks small, tax breaks for the wildly wealthy, but funding education, especially in high poverty, urban and rural areas, doesn't seem to be much of a priority.
Yeah, it isn't, and it frankly hasn't ever been. In 1954, the Supreme Court said that we would create equal education through the Brown decision. We're 6+ decades into that, which is, as high as you can legislate something in policy in this country. And research suggests quite clearly that not only have we made no progress in that, we've actually lost ground since the Brown decision was released. Schools are more racially segregated now than they were before the Supreme Court said that's illegal, and they are trending in the wrong direction. And that is perhaps one of the most interruptive things we can do if our aim is to create a pluralistic, multiracial democracy. Schools would have to reflect that. And
well, that's not the aim of the DeVosses and the Trump. That's really not the aim, is it?
Well, it's not, but it's our rhetoric. So if our aim is something else, then let's just say that.
Okay.
Right? Let's stop playing
because
games.
we take poor people and we lock them up. I mean, it's a great system for the privatizers. We cheat them out of education, and then we've got heads in beds because we've signed contracts with for-profit prisons to have 90% occupancy.
Yeah.
How many hotels? Do you think this hotel would love to have 90% occupancy year-round guaranteed?
Of course, every single place that builds beds wants heads in beds.
Absolutely.
And it's this sort of false debate or false investment conversation when you start talking about how we're going to radically change schools, and all these kids are going to be on, pathways to careers in college. And I'm not sure where they're going to go to college, because we're not building more seats in universities. So if all the kids in the country suddenly showed up fully engaged, did all their homework, were A+, where are they going to? We
Online.
literally
For profit.
Right. We literally have to create some student failure. Otherwise, all those investments that we've made planning for student failure, known as prisons, will be wasted investment.
Concordia, University of Phoenix, huge boom. Lots of taxpayer dollars, good for profit kind of stuff.
Yep, and no jobs forthwith.
Wow, come on. You can't have everything.
Right.
But, sadly, we joke, but this is the sad reality of where we're going.
Yeah. And schools, researchers for a long time have referred to schools as a social mirror. And so, if you want to see where our society's headed, go spend time in schools. And when you see the schools that serve the nation's most vulnerable youth as the schools that are consistently the least invested in, the teachers are the least supported, and then we hand-wring over the fact that dropout rates in those schools are 50% or higher, that those young people are highly disengaged, first from school and then from broader kind of mainstream institutions. It's a false innocence, right? The nation is and continues to be fundamentally dishonest about the fact that we are rapidly approaching, some sociologists argue we've already achieved the state of social apartheid, where you literally have two nations. And
you have the deserving and the undeserving.
That's right. And the undeserving, if they work hard enough and pull themselves up by their bootstraps, then they can serve the deserving. And if that's the nation that we want to build, then let's just go ahead and scrap that whole constitutional thing. Let's stop talking about being a democracy, and let's start talking about being an oligarchy, because that's the infrastructure that we're building.
Well, I would argue it's the one we've already built.
For sure, right? But we remain on that rocket ship.
We elected Donald J. Trump as president of these United States, and then we're surprised by the policy that comes out. And I think, the appointment of Betsy DeVos as head of the education, someone who's never stepped foot in a public school, then we're surprised that they want to do these vouchers. A theocrat pushing for vouchers. Why are we surprised?
I think it's a false innocence, right? That I'm not surprised, and I think a lot of people that are on the ground doing the work every day aren't surprised. I think that the challenge for the left is what is the response that isn't a response from our heels? Right? I feel like the left has spent a tremendous amount of its time. My favorite Cornel West quote is, "There is no affirmation through negation." And I think that the left has spent a tremendous amount of its time negating the right. And as we're investing all of that, look, I'm a university professor, right? So I see the value in critique, in critical analysis. I do, but I think that West is right, that critique absent affirmation is a hollow critique, right? So what are we building as a viable alternative? And the fact that we end up with Trump suggests to me that we're missing the mark, right? Absolutely. Good question. How does so many people vote for Trump when so many of Trump's policies are actually in their worst interest, right? Well, that suggests to me that on the left, we have not developed a compelling enough affirmation that this is what we're building, because the left looks a hell of a lot like the right.
Well, they're all funded by the same sources. And I go back to, we can have the whole argument when it started out, happened, all the neoliberal policies of the 70s that led into Reagan, and all the bad trade deals and all the privatization and all of that stuff that came from the left with a lot of help from policy from the far right. And this whole incestuous pool, which is where I think most people just throw up their hands and go, they're all crooks.
Yeah.
And the question thrown back at you is, how do we take your students, how do we take the next generation, the resistance or whatever you want to call them, and move them in that direction to where we actually have that moment where we do get education for all of our kids. We do allow people to go as far as their talents will take them. That if you do work hard, play by the rules, you do get ahead. How do we get to that place?
Well, I think the shift has to be from a conversation about an equal education system to an equitable education system. We've built a society that where those who need the most get the least, and those who need the least get the most, and the result of that shouldn't be shocking to anybody. You as they say, you get what you pay for.
Right.
And so if we start talking about an equitable education system, this is a system whereby you get what you need when you need it, which would mean that our nation's most vulnerable youth, which is a rapidly growing population as inequality becomes more and more radicalized, then we'll have a generation of young people that emerge from schools that are critical and civically engaged. And they're incentivized to pursue real social change and real political change in a way that a more middle-class kid really isn't.
Right.
They're not incentivized coming out of school to really think about fundamentally changing a society that has frankly supported them pretty well.
Yeah, good stuff. David, or Jeff, I appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks so much. Quick break.
The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham. On August 3rd and 4th, Nissan workers in Canton, Mississippi will vote on whether or not to join the United Auto Workers. This NLRB vote has been years in the making, and the Nissan workers are being subjected to a very aggressive anti-union campaign from Nissan that includes anti-union videos playing in the plant and forced meetings, including one-on-one meetings with Nissan supervisors, where workers are subjected to fear and intimidation tactics by the employer. Nissan worker Christopher Milton.
Fear, intimidation, even racism is part of that plant every day. We go through a lot of that. Put fear on the workers, we can control them, but they don't never give us
I'm Rick Smith, and this
chances.
Your proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind. You can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Share your thoughts of what you're hearing from the conference. What should we be doing on the education front? Vouchers the answer. Attacking those teachers, taking their pensions, lowering their wages, automating the entire thing. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm sitting here with Dan Montgomery. He's the president of the Illinois Federation of Teachers, guy we've had on the program a number of times in the past. Dan, great seeing you again.
Good to see you, Rick. Thanks for having me.
I love coming to these things, get to see old friends.
Yeah.
And, so what do you think? Automate, get rid of teachers, steal their pensions, lower wages. Thoughts?
How about Uber or Lyft for teaching? We could do that, right? You just call like, hey, I want to learn algebra. Come to my house, teach me algebra, and then go away. $5.
You just gave somebody an idea.
I know. Well, someone's already all over that, I'm sure. No, one of the weird things about this time right now in this country is we feel like a lot of basic institutions are kind of under attack, or the sands are shifting so much. It's scary to everybody. But I think there are some kind of eternal truths, and one of them is we've had, and we just have to sort of step back and remember this. We've had the greatest education system ever in history. Yep. We have, and we've done something that no other country, even Western democracies, have ever done like we've done it, which is to say, and let's say going forward from Brown versus Board, we'll take every child, no matter who they are, no matter what their background is, no matter whether they can pay a dime, and we're going to educate them, and we're going to educate them as best we can. And we do a fantastic job of it. I love to tell this story. A couple of years ago, I was at an AFT conference. Actually, it was Teach a few years ago. I was on a panel with this guy named Pasi Sahlberg, who's from Finland. And everybody points to Finland and says they've got the best system in the world. Yeah, exactly. And he was one of their education ministers, and he said he got fed up with hearing this question about like, why is American education broken and how do we make it like Finland? He said, your education system is not broken. He said, you have the best education system in the world. He said, when you adjust for poverty, your scores are higher than anyone's in each, in both the poorest and the wealthiest kids. He goes, your education system's not broken. Your society is.
You're broken. Yep.
Your society is. And he said, because of the poverty. That's the problem. And then his other little take on it was, he said, and by the way, you're never going to fix it until you get more women into leadership, into government, political leadership. And I think he's right on both counts. Again, people flock from all over the world to come to the United States, not only for our culture, our opportunity, all those things, but the education system.
Yep.
The education system. 1 million visas a couple years ago to the United States from China alone. Almost every one of them was for higher education. We have to... And again, you get people like Betsy DeVos who are in there saying nothing good about public schools, and we have to voucher and charterize. And I think, what we have to do is recommit to our democracy and realizing that public schools are fair and good for everybody. Are there problems? Absolutely. We got to fix them. They're largely tied to big societal problems like income inequality.
Yeah. You're from Illinois.
I am.
I
know where this is going.
Well, yeah, obviously. You've got a crazy governor.
Yeah.
You've got someone who's literally...
Oh, it's terrible. It's terrible. I don't know if you've heard what he's done the last few days. So, in a couple of weeks ago, the state legislature overrode his veto on a budget, which we haven't had in 3 years. A really, not perfect, but a pretty good budget, all told. And they overrode his veto, including 10 of his own party, 10 Republicans who hung tight against his threats and his money. And they said, one of them said, I love this quote, said, the governor didn't elect me, the people in my district did, and I'm going to do the business of the state. But after that, he fired like 10 of his top staff, both on the political side and the governing side. And you know who he replaced him with? all people from this group called the Illinois Policy Institute. I don't know if you've ever heard of them.
State Policy Network?
Yeah, exactly. The Koch brothers, you know.
Yeah.
The far right, I mean, these people are far right of just about everybody.
The fringe of the fringe.
Yeah, they are. And, you know.
The Commonwealth Foundation where I'm from.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Mackinac in Michigan, right? And they are not interested in governing. They have a sort of zealous ideological libertarian bent that is really out of the mainstream of American politics, certainly out of the mainstream in Illinois. And they opposed everything. They opposed the budget because simply it
wasn't bad enough.
It wasn't bad enough.
I mean,
they want to dissolve government.
Absolutely.
You know?
I mean, you look at the healthcare debate.
Yeah.
You know, the people say, "Oh, Rand Paul." Yeah, Rand Paul wanted it worse.
Exactly.
Cruz wanted it worse.
Right, that's precisely
Mike Lee
right.
wanted it worse.
That's precisely
so
right.
You've got these figures, you've got this ideology, as you've pointed out, that's about making things much worse and having this kind of old Wild West kind of thinking.
Yeah.
That understand the Wild West wasn't the Wild West.
But wait a minute, I saw the movie.
I did too.
Yeah. So the governor's kind of doubling down on going right.
Right.
I think it's. I mean.
Going to the fringe.
Going to the fringe. I think it's a political mistake from him. He's got the latest poll I saw, 11% approval rating, Governor Rauner, and so I don't.
He's so bad off that what's his name?
Blagojevich.
He could probably get reelected.
Yeah, he might. Right. Run. Yeah, you never know.
Run from prison.
Yeah. Let's hope that doesn't happen. But now there's still a political fight that you're gonna see a battle royal here in the next week or two in Illinois on school funding because it was interesting. You know, we have about the most inequitable school funding in the country.
Yeah.
I think there's like 2 states worse than us.
I'm sure Pennsylvania is one of them.
No, it isn't. It's I think Idaho, Nevada, and one other state, and I can't remember what the state is. But in any event, they actually passed we had some really good leadership on there's a state senator from kind of a place called Bunker Hill, sort of central Illinois, named Andy Menard, and he just sort of took it on and made it his own project to revamp this inequitable school funding system. And they did a very good job. And you know what? A lot of Republicans voted for it. And you know who else is for it? The school boards, which are in Illinois, downstate. They're not all liberals, and they're starving, exactly. And so we have this. So what they passed, it said the state has to pass something called an evidence-based school funding model. That's this Menard bill, which was already also passed, but it's a separate bill. So now they have to enact it. Well, they passed it. They haven't sent it to the governor yet because he says he's going to veto it. Why is he going to? He says he believes everything in the bill except for one thing. He says it's a Chicago bailout. That's the term he uses, Chicago bailout. Now that, if you live in Illinois, you know what that is. That's a sort of racist dog whistle to downstate.
Sure.
Right? And
it's like central Pennsylvania talking about Philadelphia.
Exactly. And, the coded language is, why should your tax dollars pay for black and brown kids in the city, right? Because that's just a morass and the schools are bad, blah, blah, blah. Rauner said he thought most of the teachers in Chicago were illiterate. I mean, it's just horrific stuff. So they're going to pass this. I mean, the reason he says that, by the way, is there's parity in that bill on teacher pensions. If you live downstate, your state taxes pay for downstate teacher pensions, but you don't pay for Chicago teacher pensions.
Right.
If you live in Chicago, the opposite is true. You pay not only for your own teacher pensions in the city of Chicago, they're in a separate system, but you also pay downstate teacher pensions. So this bill equalizes that. But it does a lot of other things. It makes all the school funding much more equitable. They're putting $750 million more in K-12 funding this year. So, I mean, it's like in every way, shape, and form, including, by the way, this helps downstate, mostly Republican districts, more. So it's by no means a Chicago bailout. It's just an absolute, utter lie. It's an utter lie.
We get the same thing in Pennsylvania. They say the exact same thing because we forget that there are poor rural white people.
Yeah, right.
And
exactly.
those are the areas that are going to get help as well.
That's right.
So, again, to me, it's not about white and black. It's about green.
No.
It's about poverty.
You got it.
And again, I know we hate poor people because they're slothful and they don't work and they won't pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And, you've heard it.
Yeah, sure. And you know what? And you would wish for, whether you're in Pennsylvania, whether you're in Illinois, you'd wish for elected leaders who say, listen, we're one state, right? And this state doesn't, I say this. I say, look, it's not justice for a kid in Chicago if a kid in East St. Louis is being disadvantaged. And it's not justice for a kid in East St. Louis if a kid in Chicago is disadvantaged. It's one state, and we got to succeed together. And that's what you would want from your elected leadership, to have that message. But instead, you get one of division, of race, a racial division, pitting people against each other. This is coming from a billionaire. It's sad.
It is sad, but it's not new. I mean,
it is not new.
It's just the Ronners and the Trumps and they used to want to be in the shadows, pulling the strings of people doing their dirty work.
Yeah.
Now they feel emboldened to be able to do the dirty work themselves.
Oh, exactly. You're right.
And it's scary.
It is scary
because we have really drawn this far apart to where, look at this health care bill. There was not even a blush of giving over $1 trillion in tax breaks to people who don't need it, while simultaneously taking insurance away from 22, 23, now 32 million people.
Yeah. No. I mean, precisely. And thank God that American people still, they can smell this out when they realize they're going to lose their coverage. My sister lives in Michigan. She's a court reporter, like independent contractor kind of person. She, under Obamacare, I asked her, I said, so what? She used to always have trouble getting health care, and it was really expensive, $200 a month for her to get. It's not like Cadillac coverage, but it's pretty good
but
coverage.
You're not going to go broke.
And she's not going to go broke, and she gets a free physical every year, mammograms covered, stuff like that. Well, that she would lose that, and so we're concerned about schools. Illinois gets $145 million every year through Medicaid that goes to schools. Do you know, something like 80% of kids who are special needs kids are Medicaid eligible? Yeah. That's what that pays for. It is grossly unfair, and believe me, those parents in those school districts cannot afford to lose that money.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the message in all of this. You just look at this mass inequality, and it's something we're most certainly going to have to fight back on. Dan, I appreciate the time. I know you got to go banging around to other shows here on Radio Row, but I'd love to have you come back and talk with us again in the future.
Always a pleasure. Love to do it anytime, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Always great talk with you. Our good friend Dan Montgomery, president of the Illinois Federation of Teachers. Quick break, right back here from Washington, D.C. Stick around. This is The Rick Smith Show.
I'm working all the time. It seems to me I could live my life a lot better than I think I am. I guess that's why they call me the working man.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2.
On this day in labor history, the year was 1971. It was an historic day for the men and women who deliver the U.S. mail. It was the day that the American Postal Workers Union and the National Association of Letter Carriers signed their first ever union contract. Although there had been earlier postal unions, they did not have formal bargaining rights. Postal wages were set by Congress. This meant that the starting wage for postal workers was only $6,200 in 1970. Many of these workers actually qualified for food stamps. Frustrated at their low pay and working conditions, postal workers in New York City walked off the job. Soon, 200,000 of their fellow workers across 30 major cities joined them on the picket lines. A story in Time magazine described the impact of the work action, writing, quote, "The first national postal stoppage in U.S. history and the largest walkout ever against the federal government, the postal strike almost immediately began to strangle the operation of commerce, impair government functions, and vastly inconvenience the public. To end the strike, Congress awarded the workers a 6% raise. But even more importantly, Congress decided to reorganize the Postal Service. The Post Office Department changed its name to the United States Postal Service. With this reorganization, postal workers won for the first time the right to bargain for better wages, hours, and working conditions. Their first contract raised the starting wage to $8,488 a year, a more than 30% increase to the pay level before the strike.
Whoa, yeah.
For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com, here at AFT's Teach 2017 conference. We were here last year. The breaking news, you remember last year? AFT, the first union to endorse Hillary Clinton. Today, the big news coming out. The president of AFT, Randy Weingarten, came out and said of Betsy DeVos, they likened her to a climate change denier, saying that she refuses to acknowledge, quote, the good our public schools and their foundational place in our democracy. Also said of vouchers, which, we've talked about on this program for years, a polite cousin to segregation. And that's a nice way of saying it, other than it's a ripoff of taxpayer funds to move us towards a theocracy, but my thoughts, not hers. That's why I've got Randy Weingarten sitting down with us. Randy, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, it is always great to be with you, and thanks for being so fierce for the working class.
Look, education is, to me, one of that hill that the working class has to die on.
Absolutely.
They take it away from us, it's over.
Well, what happens is, as you have said over and over and over again and called out over and over again, what we've seen in the last several decades is a rigging of the political and economic process and structure towards the rich and the wealthy. And it has, in some years it goes faster and some years it goes slower. Like, after Citizens United, you got a big jolt to the rigging. But there's been a rigging there. The only way you level the playing field is through public education and the labor movement. So shock of shock, the Koch brothers and others go after the labor movement, and the DeVos family and the Walmarts and others go after public education. Because if you do not have that ladder of opportunity, and if people don't actually have a voice at work to be a check and balance against corporate oligarchical power, how do workers have power? And how do workers have the level playing, have the opportunity? So it is the hill to climb on. I actually often say that the ladder that we are creating an economic and education ladder of opportunity that you see when just pulling it up. People who are fighting against immigration, who they themselves and the generations before them came through Ellis Island, pulling that ladder up.
Yeah, I mean, in that idea that every generation does better than the last. But, you look at it, and I go back to when I was in school, and all of the programs, the extracurriculars that were there that aren't going to be there for my kids. And we've turned education into this commodity, it seems.
Exactly right.
That, we're going to put in a couple of dollars and we get something out instead of saying we're producing critical thinking citizens.
Education is supposed to be about how we prepare children for first life and citizenship, career and college. And there is not a straight line, which is what the testing fixators wanted there to be. They wanted to figure out an algorithm that if you tested kids everything of the political and economic process and structure towards the rich and the wealthy. And it has, in some years it goes faster and some years it goes slower. Like, after Citizens United, you got a big jolt to the rigging. But there's been a rigging there. The only way you level the playing field is through public education and the labor movement. So shock of shock, the Koch brothers and others go after the labor movement, and the DeVos family and the Walmarts and others go after public education. Because if you do not have that ladder of opportunity, and if people don't actually have a voice at work to be a check and balance against corporate oligarchical power, how do workers have power? And how do workers have the level playing, have the opportunity? So it is the hill to climb on. I actually often say that the ladder that we are creating an economic and education ladder of opportunity that you see a whole lot of people who went through public schools just pulling it up. People who are fighting against immigration, who they themselves and the generations before them came through Ellis Island, pulling that ladder up.
Yeah, I mean, in that idea that every generation does better than the last. But, you look at it, and I go back to when I was in school, and all of the programs, the opportunities, the different extracurriculars that were there that aren't going to be there for my kids, and we've turned education into this commodity. It seems
exactly right.
That we're going to put in a couple of dollars and we get something out instead of saying we're producing critical thinking citizens.
Education is supposed to be about how we prepare children for first life and citizenship, career and college. And there is not a straight line, which is what the testing fixators wanted there to be. They wanted to figure out an algorithm that if you tested kids every single year and then did all sorts of different levels of assumptions, then you could reduce kids to algorithms, or reduce teachers to algorithms and kids to test scores. And what has happened is in the last few years, when we first started chatting with each other, we were in high dudgeon in that period of time. And they were using Common Core as the curriculum, that they were using the testing of Common Core as a way of enforcing all that.
Right.
And so every dollar that was, and this was right after the recession, so we still have about 30 states that spend less on education today than before the recession. But you talk about the extracurriculars, you talk about music, you talk about art. So every marginal dollar then went to the testing coordinator or to testing or to test prep instead of extracurriculars. So what does that say? How do you engage children to love school? Not by test prep, by art, by music, by extracurricular activities. So you have to have powerful learning, not testing. And so the whole process of using accountability has not just dumbed down schools, but it has made them mind-numbing for children. And so we have to fight that at the same time as we're fighting, vouchers and privatization and things like that. And what I really, one of the things that is really bothering me about the DeVos-Trump administration is not their words. I mean, their words are terrible, and it's creating a bully-like environment, and it undermines justice and all of that. So let's put that aside for a second. What really bothers me is not simply their promotion of these privatization, commoditization, let the market rule kind of strategies that have never worked. But at the same time, when these guys actually say choice, they are actually destabilizing and defunding public schools.
Right.
Look at their budget. Zeroing out summer school programs, zeroing out after-school programs, getting rid of all the reduction of class size, teacher professional development. So it's not, they're not even creating a fair fight. They're basically destabilizing the public schools, the foundation for democracy, as they're trying to promote their private alternatives.
But, that's not, honestly, ideologically, that's not outside of what they believe. They believe nothing should be in the hands of we the people. Everything should be in the hands of profiteers. And education being just another commodity like tennis shoes or T-shirts or sugar shoes.
Right. I agree. But, I think you're right. That is exactly what they believe. But they have taken an oath of office to defend the Constitution and to actually educate all children. So if they're private citizens wanting to believe that, that's their right. Now they've taken an oath of office. And as a result, they have an obligation not to the oligarchs of the country, not to the wealthy of the country, but to everyone in the country. And everyone in the country includes we the people. And everyone in the country includes a country that believed in democracy and believed that our better days are in front of us and that our next generation can do better than we do. They are dreamers and they are strivers. And we have to take the struggling to the striving. And that's what public education does.
Now that's where you get it wrong. Dreamers and striving and self-actualization. No, it's about bubbles, and it's about moving levers and doing jobs without thinking.
Yeah.
It's about, in my view, it's about moving us towards a Christian version of Sharia law and a theocratic kind of education system. Because where is this voucher money going to end up in? It's going to end up in religious schools, because I hear this from my choice friends a lot. I should have the choice to send my kids to a school that I believe in.
Right.
Not the school that's going to give them the best education, the school that they believe in.
So I am actually a religious Jew. My partner
I've got nothing wrong with people in religion.
My partner is a rabbi, and I go to shul virtually every Friday night, and we actually act in and operate in a way of Jewish spirituality. And I agree with you full on about this issue about vouchers and what it is doing, because and how wrong it is on the issue of the separation of church and state in this country. The other countries don't have a First Amendment that says there's a free exercise of religion, but we separate church and state. We did that 240 years ago for a reason, to ensure that there was free exercise of religion. And I think that value, regardless of whether you are a Hasidic Jew, an evangelical Christian, that is a really important value in America, because that can kind of flip like it did in so many different places. That is why the free exercise of religion and the anti-establishment of religion is so important, and why that line is so important. And frankly, it's the schools that make the choice, not the parents.
Right.
And because what private schools and religious schools, they're able to discriminate. And that is not what you do with a public dollar. A public dollar cannot discriminate. We have a long history of fighting injustice.
And to me, it's about reclaiming our public schools. And if we spend as much money on strengthening the community public school as we spend on, a military, I think we'd be a lot better off.
Look, I think that we know it's not just about money, it's about money and strategies. And what we've learned, frankly, I taught in the 90s. I've worked in and around schools. I've been in and around public schools for my entire life, as my mom was a second and third grade teacher. If we actually focused on what I call the 4 pillars of powerful, purposeful education, we'd actually help strengthen all neighborhood public schools. Focus on children's well-being, their social, emotional well-being. Focus on powerful education, meaning engage kids, don't just test them. Have art, have music, do things so that they're excited to come to school.
Right.
Make sure you actually teach teachers how to do this work. Meaning, stop throwing the keys at people and saying, go do it. We don't do that.
Stop beating them up.
Yeah, we don't do that. Well, that too. But we don't do, even on the training side, we don't basically throw pilots the keys and say, go fly a plane. And then the last thing is, the glue of all of this.
Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
This happened so quickly, crews had no opportunity to really fight the fire.
Raging wildfires in British Columbia forced nearly 40,000 to evacuate. Trump administration reduces royalty payments on offshore drilling. Energy Department's electric grid study contradicts claims by the Energy Secretary. Plus,
clean air, clean water, clean soil, that's where we get our food. It is what we live from.
Catholic nuns build outdoor chapel to block natural gas pipeline.
They're having none of it. All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradDog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
We have nearly 100 years' worth of natural gas and more than 250 years' worth of clean, beautiful coal.
And several million years of actually clean, actually beautiful sunshine, which you would know, Mr. President, if you looked up every now and again from your meetings with the fossil fuel industry. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, I don't know that this could possibly be a good omen, but I see that Tropical Storm
Don is now forming in the Atlantic Ocean.
Yes, it is.
That can't be good.
The National Hurricane Center announced Monday that tropical storm Don has formed in the Atlantic Ocean. It's not Donald, but Don. Hurricane names for the 2017 season were set way back in 2006, so it's only a coincidence that the name is similar to the current occupant of the White House.
That won't keep him from going after the National Weather Service, however, if Tropical Storm Don becomes Hurricane Don and wipes out the East Coast.
Well, that seems unlikely. The Hurricane Center says so far, Tropical Storm Don is small and not particularly well organized.
They didn't really say that, did they?
Yes, they did.
Oh, man. What else do you have for us today that is less ironic?
In Canada.
All gone. Yeah, it's all gone, eh?
Just 1 year after catastrophic wildfires destroyed much of the town of Fort McMurray in Alberta's tar sands region, now next door in British Columbia, more than 36,000 people were evacuated on Sunday to escape wildfires driven by heat and high winds that have already destroyed an as-yet unknown number of homes in and around southern British Columbia. There are now 160 active wildfires in British Columbia alone right now, and wildfires over in Alberta have closed parts of Banff and Kootenay National Parks. Officials are warning it's shaping up to be yet another record wildfire season.
And yet they continue to dig that dirty tar sands oil out of Alberta?
Yes, they do.
And it will soon be heading to the U.S. via the Keystone XL pipeline?
Yes, it will.
Fantastic.
Bloomberg News has obtained a leaked draft of an electric grid reliability study that concludes that the rise of renewable energy does not undermine the reliability of our electric grid. It directly contradicts Energy Secretary Rick Perry, who ordered this study to question whether clean energy policies are unfairly pushing out polluting coal plants. The draft, written by Department of Energy staff, concludes renewables pose no threat and, quote, the power system is even more reliable today. The question now is how much of that draft will survive changes made by political appointees.
They can still change it before it gets released, but thanks to Bloomberg, we now know what the actual scientists think.
The Interior Department announced its first offshore oil and gas lease sale, opening up more than 70 million acres in the Gulf of Mexico for offshore drilling. And to sweeten the deal, the Trump administration reduced royalty rates paid by oil and gas companies for fossil fuels extracted from the public's holdings, claiming that reduced royalty rates are needed to encourage drilling at a time of low oil prices and help developers get a better return on their investment.
And help screw over the American taxpayer.
But some good news. In the House of Representatives, 46 Republicans bucked their leadership last week and joined with Democrats to defeat an anti-science amendment to the annual defense authorization bill. It would have barred the Defense Department from reporting on the impacts of climate change on military facilities.
So that is not barred. The military can still report on the menace of the climate crisis.
Indeed.
Good.
Thanks to Republicans.
Thank you, Republicans.
Finally, in Pennsylvania, an order of Catholic nuns has built an outdoor chapel to block a natural gas pipeline across their land, saying the pipeline is a violation of their long and deeply held religious beliefs and reverence for creation. Pipeline company Williams is suing to use eminent domain to seize land owned by the Sisters of the Adorers of the Blood of Christ to use for the Atlantic Sunrise Pipeline in order to export fracked natural gas overseas. In an interview with the broadcast, local Mennonite pastor Melinda Clatterbuck, a co-founder of the group Lancaster Against Pipelines, which has joined the nuns, said they will block them as long as they can.
If they gain that land possession, the community of believers are going to be in that chapel prayerfully protesting when Williams tries to take it over.
You go, ladies. I want to see the Trump administration take down those nuns in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Then I saw her face. Now I'm a believer. Not a trace of doubt in my mind.
Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com, here at the American Federation of Teachers 2017 Teach Conference. This is the second time we've come to these, and it's always a fantastic event because you get to talk about something I think is enormously important, not just for the now, not just for today, but for the future of our country and the future of our children, which is why I'm sitting here with Mary Catherine Ricker. She's the Executive Vice President here with the American Federation of Teachers, also the former president of the St. Paul Federation of Teachers, who have really a historic history as well. Mary Catherine, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So, I go back. I have a 15-year-old daughter. She came to me not too long ago and said, Dad, I'd like to be a teacher. My first response was to cringe and go, no.
Oh, no.
Because,
okay.
look, you see all of these attacks that go on against teachers, and I don't want my kids to go into that stuff. How do we stop that?
Absolutely. No, I completely understand that feeling and that worry, because who would want to see their child being attacked in any situation, right? At the same time, I feel like it is actually my day job now as a teacher on leave to serve as a union president to create the sort of conditions that stop that, right? Or have teachers, both have teachers standing up for themselves so that it stops. So people understand that teachers are not punching bags. We are actually accomplished practitioners whose day job it is to meet the needs of our students, and we take that incredibly seriously. And when we accomplish that, then we are going to have, more young people saying, I want to be a teacher, and more of their, family members saying, that's wonderful, and we're proud of you.
I remember back in the late 80s, early 90s, I kept saying that the attacks on unions, the attacks on workers might stop once the more articulate, because they were going after steel workers and truck drivers, not the most articulate, educated, but not the most articulate. When they started going after teachers and they started going after professionals, maybe it would stop because they would be the ones who would put a stop to it. I'm hoping we're finally at that point to where the more articulate among us start saying, no, this is why we need unions. This is why we need education.
I feel like actually one of many things I could probably say that we have in common, right, with our fellow workers who are steel workers or others who have been attacked beforehand is we are all in professions where there's a lot of humility, right? We are humble people. You don't see a lot of steel workers walking around talking about, how safe they were on the job today because of the work they and their union have done to create like safe, productive workplaces. Right. Likewise with teachers, right? We become, that whole cross section of workers become the targets of this criticism because we don't regularly, brag about how well we met the needs of students today. We
should, though. I mean,
we should. No, well, and you giving me this opportunity to brag on behalf of our 1.6 million members is a great start.
No, because here's the thing. I respect what you do, and thank goodness you do it, because I know I can't.
Right.
I know I can't because, look, my wife and I, we spend time in our kids' classrooms. We try and help out because we know the teachers are overworked. And I see what they go through. And I tell anybody who goes, bad teachers, I go, spend an afternoon in a classroom.
That's right.
I know I can't do it. I struggle keeping my 3 kids in line, let alone a classroom of 30.
Yeah, parenting is hard enough, right?
Exactly.
And there are some similarities and differences. But I think you're absolutely right. And I do actually feel a great responsibility that our union needs to fight for the voice of teachers themselves, right? The more we tell our own story, the more you get a kindergarten or a first or a second grade teacher talking about the powerful work it takes to unlock literacy for our youngest students, for example, the more you want to be in awe of them and their work and what that takes, as opposed to patting them on the head and saying, like, it's so sweet that they work with our youngest learners.
Yeah, I mean,
like,
the patience.
It is sweet, but you know what? It is, they are, they're the rocket scientists of our profession because they unlock literacy for our kids.
No, I mean, it's just amazing what the teachers do. And I give them nothing but credit because they deserve it. But at the end of the day, what we're seeing is really an attack on your profession.
Absolutely.
And because, I get people saying, wow, they're bad teachers. I go, well, point to one. Are your kids' teachers bad? No, my kids' teachers are wonderful. We love Mrs. or so-and-so. It's all those other ones. And I think it's a lot like
You're right.
Congress. You know, our congressman's good, but the whole system sucks because we've been trained to think that way.
Right. Well, and 30 plus years, I think now, of that Phi Delta Kappa poll coming out that shows that, the grades you give your school and then in concentric circles going out, so vast majority of families give their own neighborhood schools, A's or B's,
Yep.
but then they say, well, but the schools in my district are probably B's or C's. Oh, but public schools in general are, D's or, I think that absolutely, like, your lived experience is actually the norm. It's not the exception. But when, we need those stories to come out nationwide so we start chipping away at that dominant narrative that says, oh, there must be something broken. But for some reason, it's magically not broken in my school.
Yeah.
Right? Actually, again, that is the rule, not the exception.
Well, how much do you think that is race-based? I mean, because, the failing schools tend to be those urban schools. Tend to be the high poverty schools that nobody wants to talk about. And nobody wants to talk about how they probably get the least amount of revenue per student to educate children. And maybe, if we threw some money at it, I know money doesn't solve the problem. You can't throw money at the problem. But, hey, let's try because we haven't.
That's right. No, there is definitely a nefarious side to that narrative, right? That there is, it is the code language that has emerged about somehow my school is magically okay, but somehow that school isn't. And to your point, that school is usually the one that might have the highest number of students of color or indigenous students, or the highest number of students who are on free and reduced lunch. And again, what we need to do is to point out that some of our most dedicated, accomplished practitioners and some of our most dedicated families are in those schools, right? Some of the deepest relationships I have seen in the privilege of doing this job are in schools that someone, right, some bureaucracy might label as failing, but I see deep parent engagement, and family involvement, and I see students who don't miss a day of school, and I see teachers who are there to meet the needs of their kids in really creative ways, even when those teachers are the most handcuffed in the profession. Those teachers are most likely to get told, you have to teach from this shrink-wrapped, scripted curriculum. You are not allowed to be creative with these kids because the stakes are too high. And we argue, that's right, we argue as a union that actually, if you are going to unlock the potential of any school system or any school, unlock the potential of that one. Again, give them all the creative power that they were, that they went into teaching for the first place with. Have them build those those powerful partnerships with families and with their students so that they can sort of co-create what that school should look like. That's when, that sort of teacher autonomy and that sort of real teacher agency, quite frankly, I think unlocking that is actually what will best meet the needs of our students.
No, I agree. I mean, the grill and drill never worked. And what you do is you end up turning kids off to it.
And turning teachers off from the profession.
But isn't that the point? I mean, ultimately, maybe it's just me, and I think in these grand conspiracy kind of theories, but it seems to me the attacks on teachers, the defunding of public education, all of these, we want choice programs that end up just destroying working conditions for teachers. It just seems like we're trying to destabilize a workable system so that we can piecemeal it off and, profit from it. And then have control over the curriculum so our kids get to go to schools with people just like me.
That's right. And also then to reflect a community these schools are nested in where we have segregated our access to food. We have segregated our healthcare systems, right? We have segregated our housing. Like these other systems, they are trying to, we have done a lot of work to open up education and public education to be the promise it was intended to be and expand that access to high quality schools. And instead there is this counter pressure, right, to pull schools back into the rest of the community that, where we are, we are trying to keep people separated.
And it comes back down to As I always say, we do a lot of things in society with the deserving and the undeserving. And we're seeing this with the healthcare fight, education being the same thing. It's all this kind of the Hunger Games to where the most vulnerable are the ones who continually get kicked. Because why not? They're down there anyway.
Right. Well, and that is one of the most infuriating contradictions, right? The idea that there is somehow someone undeserving of access to affordable health care, or someone who is undeserving to access to a high quality neighborhood school. Like, that is just not true. We are all deserving. All of our students deserve the sort of schools that meet their needs with a high quality, accomplished teaching force. And I really feel like that is my work, and that is our union's work. As a union of professionals, we feel a great responsibility to push back against this threat of turning teaching into a starter job that goes with your starter house and your starter marriage. Like, no, this is a career that we actually think that, when you walk into a school that has a cross-section of educators who are at the beginning of their career, right? Who have, maybe in 5 or 10 years of their career and have, 25 years into their career, and you see them work alongside each other, right? You see them lean on each other and ebb and flow with their strengths and learn how to meet their needs and better learn how to meet the student needs. That is a school that just hums. And we're seeing fewer of those schools.
Yep. Well, you're seeing
we
the
don't
older
want that
people
in any
leaving.
profession.
Right, you're seeing the older people. Look, I know a bunch of
Or
teachers
the
who have just
newer
said, you know what?
teachers not staying.
We're just getting out of this.
Right.
The attack's too much.
Yep.
And I wouldn't want to do it, honestly. Like I've said, I give teachers the utmost credit for wanting to put up with all the nonsense, plus 30 kids in the classroom, 40 kids in the classroom. I saw not too long ago in Detroit, they had 54 kids in a kindergarten classroom. I mean, those kids didn't even have enough room to trip over each other and fall. They were packed in. So,
it's appalling.
It is. And we, again, back to my school's okay, everybody else is terrible. And that's the way it should be, because my kids deserve. So last question I've got for you then, when people walk away from this discussion, what do you want them to know? What out of this conference are you hoping moves forward? I'm
going to give you a few things, right? One, I want you to know that our union, the American Federation of Teachers, is working to create the conditions that teaching is a fulfilling career, and that there are many fulfilling things about it. We know that we have work to do to make that happen, and we're working across the country with our members in different locals and in different state federations to make sure that happens, right? And to fight against those pernicious things that are chipping away at teaching as a fulfilling career. And that we also know that we are going to make sure to elevate the voices of our members, because I do think one of the things the public doesn't necessarily know, they may know it about their own child's second grade teacher, right? Or their own child's 9th grade social studies teacher. But we would like people to know that the folks we have teaching right now across the country, they are dedicated professionals. They are there because they want to be, because this was the fit for their talents in their careers. And we want that for every worker, quite frankly. We want someone who is in radio to love being in radio. We want someone who is in teaching to love being in teaching. And we want people to know that people have dedicated their talents to meeting the needs of students across the country, and not just so happens in your neighborhood.
There you go. Mary Catherine, I appreciate you taking time for us.
Thanks for having
me.
me.
Really great talking with you. Again, if you want to check out their website, aft.org, lots of stuff there, lots of information. Quick break. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1934. That was the day that came to be known as Bloody Friday. Minneapolis Teamsters had been on strike for 3 days in their third strike of the year. Trucking bosses had reneged on their May settlement. They refused to recognize union organization of inside workers. In the period between strikes, the union had documented hundreds of cases of discrimination. Now, 7,000 Teamsters effectively shut down trucking throughout the city. Local 574 leaders established a daily strike bulletin. The organizer, as it was called, would serve to guide strikers to victory. In his book, Revolutionary Teamsters, historian Brian Palmer notes that the first few days of the strike had been quiet. Then, on this day, police attempted to break the picket lines by running what seemed to be a lone scab truck through the lines. It was later discovered the truck was moving no merchandise, but was used to draw strikers into a confrontation. When flying pickets moved to stop the truck, they were ambushed. Police opened fire on unarmed picketers and then sprayed those who attempted to escape with buckshot. At least 48 were wounded. Striker Harry Ness and unemployed council supporter John Beller were killed. Palmer notes that Ness had been shot point blank in the chest. Doctors pulled 38 slugs from his body. His deathbed injunction repeated word of mouth among the strikers, "Tell the boys not to fail me now." More than 40,000 turned out to pay their respects to the World War I veteran and father of 4. Palmer adds that Bloody Friday had lasted a matter of minutes, but its meaning would leave a mark on the very fabric of Minneapolis's socio-economic relations. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. Iran continues to be the world's top state sponsor of terrorism, according to a new State Department report released on Wednesday. The report comes just days after the Trump administration certified that Iran is acting in accordance with the 2015 nuclear deal, but Iran's good behavior appears to end there. According to the report, Iranian-backed terror groups like the Lebanon-based Hezbollah directly threaten U.S. allies. The State Department accused Iran of supplying Hezbollah with thousands of rockets, missiles, and small arms in violation of UN Security Council resolutions. The report went on to fault Iran for supporting Hamas, as well as Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, and for not doing enough to bring al-Qaeda to justice. And us journalists love hot mics. Those times when politicians forget there's a microphone listening in on them. Remember this candid conversation between President Obama and Russia's Dmitry Medvedev?
This is my last election, basically. Yeah, and after my election, I have more flexibility.
Well, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is the latest victim of the hot mic, as reporters got a chance to hear his conversation Wednesday with Eastern European officials. Netanyahu was heard confirming that Israel had conducted airstrikes within Syria dozens of times to interrupt arms shipments to Hezbollah, the very weapons sales detailed by the State Department report we just mentioned. Israeli officials had never officially claimed responsibility for those attacks. Netanyahu also had a candid assessment of what it's like to do business with the Chinese.
We have a special relationship with China, and they don't care. They don't care about the political issue.
But at the end of the day, none of what Bibi had to say was all that surprising. Hence the saying that hot mics are when politicians tell the truth by accident. For more global news headlines, visit talkmedianews.com.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com, as we wrap things up day one here at the Teach 2017 conference. You go back to the voucher stuff and Randy Weingarten saying, look, a polite way of pushing for segregation, a polite way of dividing us even further and continuing that frame of the deserving and the undeserving. And as I've been saying for a very long time, this education issue, this should be one of the most important. Because once this goes away, you think of the history of the working class fighting, bleeding, dying for their kids to get out of the mines and out of the mills and into a classroom. You think about that history, and I know it's easy to forget, but you think about that. We could be back in those days. Not like those kids got jobs to go back to in the mines or mills, but you go back to Newt Gingrich saying fire those union janitors and get those kindergartners to go clean the bathrooms. Yes. Exactly what we should be doing with the youth and the future of our nation. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, especially on the voucher issue. You know, it's one of those things they keep throwing at us like there's some choice. There's not. I go back to my conversation with Mike Fulmer, Pennsylvania State Senator, who said, you can take that voucher, go anywhere. Except when I asked the question, you know, can I go to the Abington Friends School in Philadelphia? Can we go to, those $40,000, $50,000 a year kindergartens? Can we do that? And he told me absolutely. Except even he was wrong. And it's a bill that he pushed. It's ideological. It's not practical. Again, I'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, comments. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Back here tomorrow for the big conference. Send your thoughts and your questions along, and we'll grab people and talk about issues. There's a big boot camp going on here. And as I've said for a while, teachers, the educated, the articulate, union members, these are the folks that need to get a little more militant. They need to get a little bit more in people's face and defend their profession. Because you see all the arrows, you see all the attacks constantly. Just tough stuff. Anyway, thanks so much for tuning in. Back here tomorrow in Washington, D.C. And again, if you missed any of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com. Email me anytime, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Its color like the tidal flood beneath the lunar sway, imperial, mysterious, in amorous array. Democracy is colored